Venomous Stare back with StarCraft 2 action. This time we have an exceptionally exciting game between an American pro gamer on Team Root and a Korean pro gamer who, at his peak, took down the likes of Flash and Jaedong to win one of the most prestigious tournaments there ever was. Introducing the players, in the top left, playing under the Smurf ID Gratitude, it is the Root Zerg Neuro, known for his long hair, hard work ethic, and ability to take accountability for his mistakes, something that many pro gamers lack. Hatchery first here for the Root Zerg, and let's talk about his opponent, because I've casted a lot of Neuro games, and Neuro streams a ton. If you have been around in the scene for any amount of time, you probably know who he is. He makes a lot of good guide videos, he releases a lot of replays, he contributes a lot to the community. His opponent is ForGG, an aggressive Korean Terran who just finished his mandatory military conscription in Korea. Of course, if you don't know what I'm talking about, in Korea, males are forced to enter the military and serve a stint of, I think it's like 2 years. But after they finish their military service, very frequently Korean pro gamers will sort of come back to the scene. We saw this with players like MMA, of course, another very good Korean Terran who was very strong in the 2010-2011 era. And speaking of that era, ForGG was a player who played a lot of ladder and streamed a lot on the old streaming website Own3D, which of course went belly up and famously screwed a lot of their talent, just never paid them out because they went under. Destiny, the CLG League of Legends team, were among these players who really got they got screwed. They never got their money they deserved. But for ForGG, he was someone who not only played and streamed a lot, but played a lot against my favorite player, IdrA Fields. And I remember it was almost comical how much they would play each other. They would get each other sometimes 4 or 5 games in a row. And back in 2010 and 2011, scouting was a lot harder for Zerg. If you didn't know, in 2012 the Overlord was buffed, Overlord speed got buffed, and essentially that was night and day difference for Zerg at the time. He was having a lot of trouble scouting Terran, and this Overlord patch really marked a huge shift in sort of time period and metagame, because from the beta, quite frankly, all the way up until mid-2012, it was, I'm not going to say that TVZ was Terran favored, but it was harder for Zerg to scout. If Terran was going for an aggressive play or a very fast push and a follow-up push, because Overlords were so ruthlessly slow and Overlord speed was locked behind layer tech, that's right, you had to tech all the way up to layer to get Overlord speed, it was much harder for Zerg to know what the hell was going on. As we can see in this game, Neuro is on hatch tech, but he's teching into Overlord speed already. This means that he will be able to zip his Overlords around the base of ForGG and figure out what he is doing, what the plan is, what the build order is. ForGG is not the kind of player that you want to get caught on the back foot against, because he's usually going to do something aggressive and then proceed to keep doing aggressive things. And if you're not aware of what those things are, it can be very brutal. So 3 Marines are going to come out for ForGG to try to deny scouting, and Neuro sees the armory. So this screams to Neuro Hellbat push. Now whenever you see, okay, a starport right next to a barracks with a tech lab that just recently finished that's not researching anything, that screams Banshee, because they're going to do the swap and they're probably going to go for cloaked Banshees. And of course that's what's going to happen. I remember IdrA in particular complaining about how much ForGG loved to use Banshee, so it's interesting to me, 6 years later he's still doing the same style. Love to see that. 4 Queens are out here for Neuro along with Lings and Banes. The Lings and Banes come forward. The Banes managed to get a kill and a half on Hellbats. So meanwhile, Neuro is pumping Lings and Queens to really try to hold this push. Very hard to hold pushes like this without roaches, especially if you're just a little bit sloppy with your Lings, because Hellbats just decimate Lings. It looks like all the Queens and the Lings are going to die here for Neuro. but this push is starting to run out of steam. 3 queens are on the way as a plethora of lings, and I think Neuro's going to be able to hold. These 2 fresh Hellbats come up front. Notice that Neuro tried to focus the weak one, but the DPS was too much. More lings come out right as ForGG is about to get into the meat and potatoes of the Zerg base, which of course is the drone. The drone is really the bread and butter of Zerg. Getting as many of these guys in the early game is really what you're aiming to do with Zerg in almost every matchup. The aforementioned Banshee is out, and it gets a couple Bane kills. Double Evo Chamber coming for Neuro, a few Spores as well, and of course more drones. ForGG is going to fly into the main. Notice that Neuro has laid a tumor and subsequently spread it once. Man, this makes it easier to defend Banshee Harass. I can't stress enough how important it is to lay that one tumor down and to cover the main of your base, especially with the natural. We can see here there is a little bit of blank space on the natural, but this creep spread has helped a little bit. But on certain maps there is a lot of empty space between the main and the natural, and whenever your opponent goes for Banshees, these queens just get caught in molasses trying to transfer between the main and the natural, and you can really take a lot of damage, especially if the Terran player is willing to sit out over in this area and pick off your buildings. Again, more aggression for ForGG, more factories on the way, so he's going to go for mech. This is not going to be a Villo-style turtleneck, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be aggressive mech. 6 drones on the way here for Neuro, so things could get messy, as I don't think he was expecting quite an aggressive and fast follow-up push, but like I said, ForGG loves to play like this. He loves to stay in your face. Think of Patrick Beverley in the NBA, someone who is very aggressive and always sort of pushing you and trying to force you to make mistakes. As the meat and potatoes of the Zerg gets chewed away at, like when XCal and Blame Truth finally made the sequel a few days ago on Twitch. Shout out to you if you get that reference. Overseer on the way for Neuro. He did lose his Baneling Nest, and he lost a few drones. Now before, he didn't lose any drones. He lost 8 there. And really with Zerg, you can afford to lose lings and queens all freaking day long as you have a huge drone count behind it. Neuro is still really screaming out drones here, just pumping away drones ruthlessly like a good Zerg. Zerg players oftentimes don't really realize, especially at the lower levels, Zerg has to make a binary choice between units and drones. And that's sort of the key difference between Protoss and Terran and Zerg, because Protoss and Terran, of course, have orbital commands and nexuses to make units, aka workers. I misspoke, I should have said make workers. And then they have separate production buildings to make attacking units. Zerg, of course, everything comes out of the hatch, so it is actually a big decision for Zerg at all points in the game. Should I be making drones or should I be making attacking units? Now I know for a lot of you this sounds very obvious, and I'm sort of like talking about something that you already know, as we see double Liberator Harass coming out, as ForGG is just not relenting with the harass, but he does actually lose 1 lib there. Call it herpty derp. Hydralisk coming out here, and with a lot of DPS actually with Hellions and Cyclones, the Hydras will die, but with the Queens coming up, it's not really going to matter because Queens are very strong at defending. They're actually psionic units, not armored, so Hellbats don't rip them apart as they do roaches. The reference that I tried to make here was lost 1 lib like Al Franken, but I butchered it and couldn't remember the name. I was going to say Grabby McFeels, but no one would have gotten it. Hellion Tank coming out here for ForGG. Blue Flame Hellion, of course. Now the Blue Flame upgrade, I can't really stress how important this is versus Zerg, especially considering how much of their defense really relies on Zergling-based aggression. It really blows my mind when I see mech players like a Villo just delay this Blue Flame forever. It's so good, it's so worth having. And we can see the, I don't even know what this one is called, it's the Cyclone anti-air upgrade. It's 75.75, which is absurdly cheap, and it just makes it where the extra boom 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 initial phase of the Cyclone's anti-air attack is longer lasting. If you don't know, when the Cyclone locks on to air units, it really lets the Tray 8 go for about 4 shots, and then it goes back to normal fire rate. Well, with this upgrade, the Tray 8 goes even longer, as they say. You let the 6 spit, as I'm going to stop just making esoteric gunline references and go back to casting. Hellbat Cyclone coming out here. This is going to be very, very scary for Neuro, as we see ForGG has pretty much been attacking non-stop. His third base is alive and kicking. 3 tank siege up here, and Neuro is in a precarious position. And IdrA is out here, but Bane speed is not done yet. And what is Neuro to do? Because this 3 tank push is really difficult to deal with. He does have Swarm Host, and he tries to flank the tanks here, and he's running up here with Ling Bane, but Queens and Slow Banes are so slow, and we can see he took a ton of damage there. The Swarm Hosts come in, and we sort of think about the Locust nerf and smile as we see the Locust just get absolutely eviscerated. And if you're a Terran player, that's got to make you happy to see Locust just do absolutely nothing. And it looks as though ForGG is going to take this base and take a bit of a lead in the game, as he does have a 4th of his own, starting to shoot onto the Overlords, which is always a bad sign if you're Zerg whenever the Terran player starts to encroach on your Overlords. But the Korean pro gamer who took down Flash and Jaedong is threatening to take down the American Zerg here. Neuro is making a plethora of Hydras, and if we go to the upgrade tab, ForGG has really delayed his upgrades, doesn't have any upgrades, and Neuro does have 2-2, or he's about to have 2-2. And what's funny to me is it's going to start looking weird here, as the mech units that sort of eviscerate everything are going to die themselves, as the difference between 2-2 and 0-0 can't be overstated. I mean, it is a huge difference. We saw there the army sort of theoretically looked like ForGG was going to take it, but that is the difference between having 2-2 versus 0-0, as ForGG's push sort of peters out there, the tank dies for its trouble, and where does that leave us income-wise? Well, ForGG might be behind in workers, but he's ahead in mules. Such is the life, or as such is life for the Zerg player. And did we have a drop? We did. I'm going to rewind a bit to catch that. Yeah, it was a Baneling drop. So a Baneling drop came down and killed 14 workers for ForGG. This is a great move. Remember earlier when we saw that Dropper Lord get morphed? Well, that's what happened. So let's just re-examine this push, because it was very entertaining. Of course, it's very important to flank the Terran army with Zerglings whenever they have siege tanks. The siege tanks are the bread and butter of Terran mech. They sit in the back, they deal enormous damage, and if you just attack head on, very frequently you will just get eviscerated. It will be very hard to win any sort of engagement. But because Neuro really gutted what made this push strong, the tanks, of course, we're down to just a few tanks, many of them marching across the map. And watch this, because there's no tanks, the Locusts are suddenly worthwhile. And like I said, I mean, the upgrade advantage here is really what turned it, that and the tanks. Sort of funny how one-sided that fight was, despite the fact ForGG was down 3 hull upgrades initially. So let's just take stock of what's going on. ForGG is playing an aggressive mech style that incorporates both Cyclones, Hellions, and tanks. He has a pretty damn good economy, but what he really needs to focus on is adding a second armory and starting upgrades. Anytime you get down 4 upgrades, no matter what race you are and what the composition is, you're treading on thin ice. Really, there is no more true statement or better example of this whenever you see this, whenever Terran Bio is involved. If you're 0-0 Zerg, or 1-1 Zerg versus 3-3 Bio, or 0-0 Zerg versus 2-2 Bio, it is laughable. I mean, the Bio just eviscerates you. It's almost impossible to win engagements. If you want a good example of what upgrade disadvantage looks like and how important it is, I urge you to look at games where that occurs. Changeling here, and I have no idea why changelings are that color on the map for observers, as a Hydra drop occurred here, but did really next to nothing. ForGG had vision of that Dropper Lord and was aware of the fact he was probably going to get dropped again, because Zerg players, and really any player who uses drop play, are very likely to drop again at the same spot once they've had success once. Locusts are going to come out here, but against this much army, I would say that they're just going to die instantly. Okay, they get a tank. They get 2 tanks. Nice. So that was a nice little pickup for Neuro there, as very frequently what you want to do versus mech is always be aiming to limit the tank count. Because as I said before, the tanks are the bread and butter of mech armies. The tanks are what's scary. Cyclones, sure they're scary, sure they're powerful, but the splash damage from upgraded siege tanks is really what does you in as Zerg. Because if you're on this big of an economy as Zerg, you can actually make armies that kill Cyclone armies. But throw a few tanks in, all bets are off. Suddenly you have to engage correctly. You have to maybe have Vipers or an upgrade advantage like we saw. Neuro had both Swarm Host and a huge upgrade advantage. And still it was a very razor's edge close fight where he lost a base. Banelings are being morphed here for Neuro. Thankfully he has Baneling speed this time. He has both IdrA upgrades. +1 is about to finish for ForGG, and nice. The second factory is coming down for our former MSL champion, the guy who defeated Flash and Jaedong in the game that they made their name in. Notice that he's making a base up here. Neuro is moving out with a massive Hydra Bane army around the 4th base. Now this is why Backwater is sometimes considered Protoss and Terran favored, because basically ForGG can just park his army in the spot and be fine. Neuro doesn't really have any attack pass to the 3rd or the natural. Look at this, as Locusts are going to come in here, and they're going to do some decent damage, but thank goodness Neuro intelligently backed away. The Locusts came in, they did a little, but then they died very quickly, and the Terran player is sort of in this position where he's like, alright, come at me, bro. Trade your moneyed units into a massive wall of siege tanks. As Neuro, you should always be looking to trade Locust, but not trade your main army. As Zerg, whenever you make Swarm Host, of course, it's all about sending the Locusts in and doing free damage. Every time you can send a wave of Locusts in and do free damage, you're doing yourself a favor. And look at this, Neuro wanted to take this base up here, and he figures out that ForGG has it, and he's making this an orbital. What? That is absolute insanity, because if you just look at ForGG's perspective, he can defend all 4 of his bases by parking an army here and here. There's really no reason this base should be an orbital. Look, he already has 4 orbitals, and we can see Hydralisk trying to fight some of the mech army, but they're seeing the tanks, they're going to retreat. And ForGG, this is sort of, I feel like this is sort of why IdrA always would call him like greedy and abusive and things like this, because making this an orbital, I mean, this is just so greedy. On a map like Backwater, essentially all you have to do is make this a planetary and all of your bases have some sort of defense on them. Backwater is a very, very strong mech map. Of course, you might be asking, what makes a map a good mech map? Well, basically the ability to park a mech army somewhere and have it defend multiple locations. If you have to have your army spread out in a ton of different locations, that's bad for mech. ForGG is going to move out here though and sort of siege his tanks at the front, and oh, big blinding clouds come out and all of the tanks are worthless. And this is what I was talking about. If your tanks don't do damage, you're in a very bad situation. And suddenly ForGG is plummeting in supply, as that was a very, very sloppy move out, as Neuro knew where the army was and ForGG taps out. So the former MSL champion loses to the American Macro Zerg. Let's go ahead and rewind it a little bit, because this one sort of ends very quickly. You wouldn't really expect a mech game to end like this. So one of the most important things to note is how out on the map Neuro is. He has solid creep spread, but because he's been poking with Locust constantly, he knows where the army is. He just attacked up here. He can sort of deduce that the army is around. It's either going to be here defending the bases or here. Or wait, that hasn't happened yet, my bad. So this happens. Yeah, I rewinded a little bit too much for my own good. So Neuro is pushing. He sees, okay, well, he has his army, of course, defending all 4 bases in one spot. So it's going to be hard for me to attack into that. I guess I'll get Vipers. Now Vipers are sort of what Zerg has to make to defend against mech, and it's very, very strong against tanks. And you have to really spread tanks to properly defend against Vipers. So this is what I'm talking about. Neuro sees this base, it's an orbital for God knows what reason. ForGG loses his workers, he's forced to lift and move his whole army up here. So this is what I was talking about. Whereas before, you can defend 4 orbitals by having army here and here. Suddenly when you want to take a 5th, if this is a planetary, yeah, all it takes is a few turrets and a few tanks to defend a planetary. Maybe a sensor tower to see the army coming. But with an orbital, it's like, oh, well, crap, I have to sort of move my whole army up and down. And as Terran, the last thing you want to do with mech is get caught with your pants down and your tanks unsieged. And that's what happened. Because ForGG was forced to be the one reacting instead of the one playing defensive, he got caught out. And right here is the moment of truth. Neuro knows this base is up here. This is the moment I wanted to talk about before. Neuro knows this base is up here, and he knows that ForGG just moved his army up here. And of course, Neuro wants to attack anyway because his Vipers just finished. So really what ForGG needs to be doing is running around with Hellions and leading with Cyclones and scanning ahead, and then positioning his tanks where they're split. This is the opposite of what he wants to be doing. Having all of his tanks sort of in the front, clumped up with a 2 upgrade disadvantage. And what happens? He has to siege all of his tanks in about the radius of 2 blinding clouds. Now Cyclones are strong, but like I said, if it's just Cyclones, Zerg can deal with it. And furthermore, it's not just Cyclones. It's 30-something dead supply and a bunch of Cyclones. So it's worse than just Cyclones. This battle would have gone better for ForGG if he had no tanks and 15 more Cyclones, because then the Cyclones can actually move around and sort of evade the blinding cloud somewhat. And now obviously I'm not saying make pure Cyclone, I'm simply making the point that if all of your tanks are rendered useless, then even though it says, oh, you have 195 supply, not really. Basically you only have 33 Cyclones worth of fighting supply. So right here, this is the worst with mech. This is exactly the opposite of what you want to happen. ForGG has 4 orbitals. He has plenty of scan energy. You have to be so careful as Terran not to let this happen, because one slip up like this, you see suddenly you're in a spot where you're sieging all of your tanks, not only at the front, but all clumped together. So notice he loses a few tanks right out the gate. The other half are rendered useless. How are you going to win this fight? You have this many Cyclones versus a max Zerg. Locust, Hydra, Queen, Viper. And if you look at the supply, ForGG is down, he's going down. Yeah, rough stuff here, and he has to GG. So, that was ForGG vs Neuro. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe for more.